Great. And yes, so welcome to those who are joining from Melbourne. Welcome back to lockdown 2.0, as they're all calling it. And for those who are joining from anywhere else around the world, hopefully you're all staying safe and well in the current situation. So my name is Meg Blake. I'm a consultant from ThoughtWorks that works in product management and experience design. Emily, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Emily Billings. I work at a company called Pichler in Melbourne, and I'm a product owner for a mobile app. So we've been co-hosting ProductTank for just over a year together. Meg's been around a lot longer.
Great. Roman, I don't know if you're going to give yourself a brief introduction.
Yes, thank you, Meg. I'm Roman, and I work as a product management consultant, teacher, and I guess author, I should say. So yeah, and I'm joining you from just outside London, Buckinghamshire in the UK, and very much looking forward to the session.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm keen for those who have joined the call already, just to put perhaps in the chat, not the Q&A, but I'm interested to hear who has joined a ProductTank meetup either in Melbourne before or around the world. Got a few. I love always seeing where people are joining from because it's always really interesting to see which countries we have participants from. So feel free to put that in the chat. For those of you who haven't attended a ProductTank before, it's part of the family of Mind the Product. So that's conferences, content, and now there's a membership available as well, which has some great content from the most recent digital conference, as well as different articles and sessions from previous conferences that you can get access to. And ProductTank now runs in over, I think the last count was about 90 cities around the world. So it really is a great community of product managers, sharing knowledge, sharing experiences, sharing challenges, and hopefully making each of us better product managers and practitioners in the process. I guess the only other announcement to make is just thanks to ThoughtWorks for letting us use their webinar Zoom account tonight. It's been pretty generous, and I think because the number of participants we have, it's great to be able to have access for everyone. So yeah, I reached out to Roman after listening to a Mind the Product podcast called The Product Experience, and I guess his comments around product leadership and stakeholder engagement really sparked my interest. And so I reached out to Roman. He was very kind enough to accept our invitation to join us. The benefits of, I guess, running these events as a webinar is that we get to reach out to maybe some of our really experienced practice leaders across the world and get their insights. So yeah, besides that, I've absolutely used a lot of Roman's tools, as many of us probably have, the product vision board and the goal-oriented product roadmaps. I've used them myself and introduced them to my clients. Thanks, Roman, they've been very useful. And for those of you who are listening, if you can put questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, Emily will be running through questions with Roman at the end of Roman's talk. So I'll hand over to you, Roman. Interested to hear your insights around dealing with and managing challenging stakeholders. I think we've all had those experiences and those personal conflicts that can be challenging to resolve. So I'm really keen to get your tips. Thanks, Roman.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Again, lovely to be with you. And yeah, as you just heard Meg say, I'd like to talk about dealing with difficult stakeholders and share hopefully some helpful tips. And I'm planning to talk for about 25 minutes or so, and then I'm very much looking forward to answering your questions. So when I meet somebody who is difficult, then that's usually because I disagree with the views of the individual, her or his opinions, or maybe I find the behavior of the person difficult. And so there's usually an element of disagreement, of friction or conflict. Now, conflict happens routinely. It happens at work. It happens at home. It simply means that there's a clash of interests between two or more people. So really just part of our human experience. Now, you might say, well, if dealing with difficult people in conflict is so normal, then well, what's the big deal for us product managers, product owners, for us product people? But I think as product people, we tend to experience a fair amount of conflict. And one of the reasons is our role. So we interact with different groups, and those groups of people tend to have different perspectives and interests. So they're the users and customers. And depending on the market that your product serves, that might be a rather large and heterogeneous group of individuals. And additionally, users often don't have the same needs as the customers, and often they don't have the same expectations. So there may be an element of disagreement and friction there. And then we interact with the business stakeholders. So that might be somebody from marketing or sales or support or operations or finance, service, depending on the type of product you have. And these individuals come from different business units, departments. And so, again, they're likely to have different perspectives. They're likely to have different goals and interests. And so, a little bit more friction here. And then finally, we work with one or more development teams. And in an agile context, a development team will be cross-functional. So people have different skills and areas of speciality. And that can give rise, again, to different viewpoints and different perspectives and needs. So as the product person, the person in charge of the product, we're right at the center here, connecting those different groups and trying to somehow deal with the different expectations and different needs, and thereby experiencing, as I suggested earlier, a fair amount of conflict, at least at times. Now, again, conflict is natural. The unfortunate thing for me is that many of the conflicts I've witnessed at work weren't handled particularly skillfully. So some were suppressed and some were suppressed and ignored, and many were never resolved effectively. And when that happens, when we poorly deal with conflicts, then they leave behind a trail of bad feelings and mistrust. And that's ultimately rather sad and unfortunate. But on the positive side, if we manage to constructively address conflict, then conflict, disagreement, friction can become a source of innovation and creativity for our products. It can actually strengthen the relationships we have with other people, and it can help us learn more about ourselves. So it can be a very positive thing. Now, to make this talk a little bit more concrete, I thought I'd introduce a little scenario to you, share it with you, and it's taken from my new book called How to Lead in Product Management. And the person addressed as you in this scenario is the person in charge of the product. So, listen, I really need you to add this feature to the release, and I'm not going to take no for an answer, says Sophie, the head of sales, as she stands in front of your desk. And you can feel your shoulders tensing and your stomach tightening. There is no way that you can add more work to the development effort. The dev team is already struggling with the current workload. But Sophie is a powerful senior manager who will not be afraid to escalate the issue. What should you do? Now, you may have different reactions to this scenario and different suggestions how we could respond, but it turns out that generally speaking, there are 4 common conflict strategies that we resort to. Unfortunately, these common strategies aren't typically very helpful. And I've taken them from a book called Say What You Mean by a gentleman called Oren J. Sofer. And the first of those 4 common but unhelpful strategies, he calls competitive confrontation. So that means engaging directly and, in an open conflict. So if I'm the person in charge of the product and Sophie comes to me, then I might say, using this conflict strategy, well, I hear what you say, Sophie, but as you well know, there's no way we can add more work to the development effort. We're committed. the team's struggling as it is, and what you're doing here, who are you? You're coming to my desk and you're demanding this feature and you speak to me rather rudely. I'm not going to have this. I can't do it and I won't accept your feature. No way. Now, if this is a smart strategy dealing with a senior stakeholder, I'll leave that decision up to you. But it's certainly a conflict strategy, competitive confrontation I've seen product people use. And it's based on the idea that dealing with conflict is about winning or losing, and I'll try and win. I'll try and protect my interest. Any empathy I show will be seen as a weakness. I need to put Sophie in her place because she's the one to blame. It's all her fault. She triggered it. Why does she come to my desk and just demands that I put in into the release this feature? How come? How dare she? How outrageous that is. So it's in a way you could say driven to a certain extent by a righteous effort. I think I'm right and Sophie, the other person, is wrong. That will be an example of competitive confrontation. Another strategy that's still about trying to win and put Sophie in her place, but this time in a more indirect way, would be passive aggression. So if I was passive aggressive to Sophie, I might try to make life difficult for her and get the better of her that way. So I might say, oh, Sophie, I hear you. I understand, this may be important to you, but this is going to be extremely difficult. We're already so busy, as I'm sure you understand and appreciate. I can put it on the product backlog, that feature, but I'll have to talk to the development team. I can't promise you anything. I may have to go back to you, get back to you on this. And that's going to be extremely hard, extremely difficult. And then I might go to the development team and say, guys, guess what? Sophie just came to my desk and she demanded this feature and I had to put it on the product backlog, but hey, don't worry. I'll deprioritize it straight away. We'll never get to it. And then I might go and talk to other product people and talk badly about Sophie behind her back and say like, oh my God, has she done this to you as well? What a horrible person. Oh no, I just want to stay clear of her. No, just going to try and avoid her and ignore her in the future. And again, that way, try and put her in that place. Very much still coming from, basing my actions on the belief that I'm right and Sophie's wrong, and I'm trying to win here and I'm trying to protect my interests, but doing it openly, directly, wouldn't necessarily be beneficial for me. The final two strategies are less about winning, they're more about mitigating, minimizing our losses. And so the next one is called conflict avoidance. And an example of conflict avoidance in the scenario that I shared with you might be to say, is this really all such a big deal? I mean, let's be reasonable and look at the issue as grown-ups. Sophie, she's a senior stakeholder. Usually she's a reasonable person. She needs that feature. I'm sure there's a good reason why she needs it. In fact, we can just go and talk to her and find out. Now, it's impossible to fully implement this feature within the next few months, but maybe we can split the difference, right? Maybe we can strike a deal and make a compromise. Maybe, we can do a third or half of the feature. That this obviously doesn't give her everything, but, at least a little bit. And then we might be able to do the rest, in one of the subsequent development efforts. How about that? And some of you might say, yeah, that sounds good. That's what I would do. Yeah, that sounds like a good strategy. And I think it does. It sounds good, at least superficially. And as long as we purely look at the issue around the feature and say like, well, that feature, how big is it? What big would the benefit be? But for me, if I was the person in charge and Sophie came to my desk and spoke to me in a demanding way, then the issue around being able to implement the feature, that wouldn't be the main source of disagreement or friction. The real issue for me would be that I would feel that Sophie wouldn't respect my role, the role of hopefully an empowered product person. And I would expect that even senior stakeholders show an element of respect and not treat me essentially like a personal assistant, a PA, demanding a feature and saying, do it, I need it, do it. So personally, I would regard a behavior like this as unhelpful and, quite frankly, inappropriate. And secondly, I would expect that in any company with product people, professional product people, there are product management processes, and there's a way to regularly review the product strategy and the product roadmap, reflect on goals and outcomes and benefits you'd like to achieve, and look at ideas for new features and feature requests and evaluate them in the context of the strategy and roadmap, and then make the right decision, hopefully by reaching some form of agreement or consensus. And so a senior stakeholder coming to me and trying to push through her or his request and getting it extradited, essentially, I don't think, again, that's helpful. It doesn't really show that Sophie's aware of the processes or willing to follow them. So, you know, if I now say, yeah, that's, you know, I'll try and have a can-do attitude, and I'll say, like, you know, let's split the difference, and, you know, try and implement this feature a little bit, or as much as we can, then I think that indirectly accepts and supports the behavior that Sophie has shown. It indirectly approves that behavior, and, you know, what would prevent her then from acting in a similar way in the future, and possibly other stakeholders copying her behavior. So for me, just purely focusing on the feature, that wouldn't resolve the conflict. And then the final strategy is called passivity. And an example of passivity would be to say, what should I do? I'm just a little product person, and there's Sophie. She's a powerful stakeholder. Of course, I can try and say no, but what's the point? I mean, Sophie's going to go straight to my boss. She or he is going to come to me and say, Roman, do it. If I might as well just say yes. And yeah, I know this is going to be really difficult, and I don't know what I should say to the development team. They'll be mad as hell, but I don't have a choice. I really don't. But I don't think that's true, right? I think we all have a choice, and by just being passive, we essentially give up our needs, and in a way, even worse, we also give up the needs of the development team, and in a way, don't protect the team here. So I don't think that'd be helpful and appropriate either. And again, it just indirectly supports Sophie's behavior. Now, if none of those 4 strategies are helpful, then what could help us? Well, it turns out that not too dissimilar, but admittedly much more extreme challenge was encountered by the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States. So imagine that you are faced with the following situation. Armed terrorists have kidnapped a group of civilians, and they're now asking for a ransom, and they're threatening to kill their hostages if their demands are not fulfilled. Now, if you grew up like me in the 1980s with Hollywood movies, you might be tempted to say, what's the big deal? Send in a Rambo-like agent who can single-handedly free the hostages and capture the baddies, right? So apparently the FBI have tried this approach with a very low success, but a high death rate. So over the years, they've developed something else, and this something else is what I'd like to share with you now. It's called the Behavioral Change Stairway Model, which was made popular by Chris Voss' book, Never Split the Difference. So no matter if we are faced with an armed terrorist or a difficult senior stakeholder like Sophie in the scenario, what we'd like to, oh, I've gone too far. How do I go back? Oh, I'm back now. That's the drawback of animated slides, right? So anyway, what we'd like to encourage is a positive behavior change, right? So we'd like Sophie to understand. I'd like Sophie to understand that her behavior that she's showing in the scenario isn't helpful, and there's a better way to interact with me. There's a better way to request a feature, a more appropriate, more helpful way. And I'd also like her to be open to my perspective and my suggestions. A trouble, of course, is that as the person in charge of the product, we lack what is referred to as transactional power. We can't tell the stakeholders what to do. I can't make Sophie listen to me. I can't make her follow my advice. And it's impossible, right? And I can't even offer any incentives, like a promise of a bonus or pay rise. So all I can do really is try and influence her so that, by influencing her, she opens up to my ideas, my recommendations, my guidance, and she ultimately follows my lead. Now, that of course then, leads on to the question, how can I influence a senior stakeholder like Sophie? How can we influence people? And the answer here in this model is by building a trustful connection, through rapport. It's only when Sophie trusts me that she will be willing to truly listen to me, and that she will be willing to follow my lead, my advice. Now, how do I build trust with people? How do we build trust with people? One key element is to empathize, to try and understand where Sophie's coming from and reach out to her with warm-heartedness. So rather than reacting with aversion, and rather than attaching blame and saying, she's wrong, I'm right, rather than lecturing her about why she's wrong and how she must change her behavior, taking a real interest in what's going on for her and why this is so important to her, what drives her behavior, what drives this request, trying to understand her feelings, trying to understand her underlying unmet needs. And so you could say empathy is about coming from a place of curiosity and care, and kind of trying to be kind to Sophie, no matter if we agree with her views and her behavior or if we disapprove of them. It just means being there and accepting what's happening before we criticize, before we then decide how to respond to it. And a key way to empathize with people is to listen to them, to actively listen, to make a real effort to understand what is going on and what is being said. Just like you would in a customer interview, for instance, when you carry out some user or market research. Now, this model is called the Behavioral Change Stairway Model, as these elements form part of a, sequential process. We first have to practice active or deep listening in order to then build empathy and establish a trustful connection so we can influence the person and hopefully encourage a positive behavior change. So we can't skip those steps, and I think it's difficult to rush them. So it takes time to build a trustful connection. And of course, there's no guarantee that this will work. But given the fact that we lack transactional power, what other choice do we have? Now, as active listening is so important in this model, it's the very first step, I thought I'll share 3 listening tips with you. And the first one is to be fully present and listen attentively. Now, that might sound rather trivial. It's like, what's the big deal? Yeah, just sit there and listen. But I think it can be very hard, certainly for me, to lead with presence and give my full and undivided attention to the other person, particularly when I'm having a difficult conversation, and particularly when I may not agree with what the person is saying, or if I may not find the person particularly likable. But the important thing about being attentive when listening to somebody and really making an effort to be there is not only to take in all the information, but also make the other person feel appreciated and valued. I think as human beings, we notice if somebody is truly listening or sort of half listening or pretend to listening and already thinking about how to respond and what to say. And that makes a real difference. It's a trust building measure. If we make an effort and we listen attentively, we are truly present. And again, that doesn't mean that we agree. It doesn't mean that we approve. It just means that we accept what is being said. Now, in order to be able to listen attentively, I find it helpful not to rush into any important conversation. And so, again, going back to the scenario I shared with you earlier, if Sophie spoke to me, then I might have, a fairly strong emotional reaction. I might feel irritation, frustration. I might feel anger. I might feel worries and concerns. I might be concerned about how should I respond. It's inappropriate behavior, but if I now say something, what will be the impact on me, and possibly, what people think about me and my career prospects, and all sorts of things. So there might be, many different difficult thoughts and emotions present. And then, I'm from past experience tells me that then immediately trying to resolve the situation and have a difficult conversation, even though I've got all these difficult thoughts and feelings present, is usually not a good idea for me. I tend to then say something I later regret and I may have to apologize for. So it's better for me then to pause and say to Sophie, look, Sophie, it's really important for me to resolve the issue, but I'm feeling a little bit worked up right now. Can we please talk about this in an hour? Or can we please have a meeting in the afternoon or tomorrow morning, whenever the right point in time might be? So don't rush into an important meeting if, in a way, emotionally, mentally, you're not quite in the right place to be fully present. And then the second listening tip is to be respectfully curious and try and suspend judgment and listen with an open mind. So I think open-mindedness is an important quality for us as product people to cultivate. If we're not open-minded, if we're attached, if we cling to preconceived ideas and notions, if we think we know best, it's very hard to learn something new. It's very hard to improve our product and to innovate. So you may know this from talking to users and customers, and maybe receiving difficult feedback or ideas that you disagree with. It's still helpful to be grateful for what people come up with, what people suggest, and be open-minded, at least initially, and look at it and listen to it without immediately criticizing or judging the idea, evaluating, saying like, oh, what a lot of rubbish. It's never going to work. How inappropriate is that? So going back to the Sophie example, it might be that this feature really would be extremely helpful to move the product forward and to create the desired benefits, achieve the desired outcomes. So, if I'm too critical, if I'm too judgmental, if particularly, I think, oh, it's Sophie again, and she's requesting that feature again, and oh, look at her, and wow, the way she's talking to me, and then discard the feature, then, that might actually be not beneficial, right? But that's, again, certainly something for me that's easy to do. I think it's natural that as product people, we have opinions about our products and what's right for our product and not. And I think we should be opinionated, but I think it's equally important to learn to hold our opinions lightly and again, not be overly critical and judgmental, and allow different perspectives to exist. And then, pause and reflect on them, and then consider how we should respond. And finally, listen not only for the facts, what is being said, but also for the feelings and the underlying needs. If Sophie comes to me and she's got a red face and she talks rather loudly, then chances are she's upset, she's worked up, and then that might be interesting to explore and understand why is she so upset, and how is that connected to maybe an underlying need? Why is that feature so important to her? And in fact, so important that she's making an effort to see me at my desk, I'm using this desk example, and I'm realizing finally 20 minutes or so into my presentation that for most of us, probably Sophie coming to our desks in the present situation isn't that realistic, and who knows how realistic it's going to be in the future. But in that case, just take it as a metaphor. She comes and calls us, gives us a video call, and talks to us in a demanding, maybe slightly rude manner in a video call. That can happen too. So yeah, try and understand what is the underlying need, what is the underlying interest, what's driving this behavior, what's really going on for her. Maybe there's a sales target that her group needs to meet. Maybe there's a personal target that she wants to meet, or maybe there's another kind of objective or benefit associated with this feature. But again, in order to make progress and resolve the issue, it'd be worthwhile for me to find out. So to sum up, dealing with difficult people is part and parcel of being a product professional. I don't know if you like that statement. I don't necessarily like it either, but I think it's just part of our job. You know, it's called product management, but I sometimes think so much is about dealing with people that, you know, I don't necessarily think people management would be the better term, but you know, I sometimes think it's more about the people than the product, and it'd be a mistake to deprioritize relationship building work and stakeholder engagement work and say like, yeah, you know, I know that's important, but I've got so much other real work to do, right? I'll get to it once I've reworked the strategy and I've updated the product roadmap and I've reprioritized the product backlog and I've written all those user stories. And then maybe, if I have time, because just to remind you, unresolved conflicts don't go away. In fact, they sometimes grow stronger. There's resentments, there are bad feelings, there's mistrust, and that affects relationships. It can affect our mental well-being, and it certainly reduces productivity. So if I have to work with Sophie again and there's this unresolved conflict, then, you know, I probably wouldn't be overly happy, and the collaboration wouldn't probably be very effective. And finally, learning to resolve conflict is a key leadership skill in my mind. I feel it's a skill that we should actively develop as product people. It strengthens the work environment, it strengthens our connections, helps improve the work environment, and also helps us grow as individuals, learn more about ourselves. So I hope that you found my thoughts helpful. Thank you very much for listening. If you're interested, if you'd like to learn more about my thoughts on leadership, please check out my website. And as I mentioned, I published a new book a few months ago called How to Lead in Product Management, that talks in more detail about engaging with stakeholders and resolving conflict. And then finally, I'm very much looking forward to your questions now, but if for whatever reason I don't get to answer your question, or if there's a follow-up question you'd like to ask, then don't be shy and reach out to me and drop me an email. So yeah, thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Roman. That was very, very interesting. I think that's a situation that a lot of us find ourselves in on a semi-regular basis, and it's really good to hear some different strategies in order to address those relationships and hopefully build better relationships in order to build better products. So for everyone who's on the line, I can see that there is some Q&A is just starting to really build up, so we'll jump right in. But if you do have a question, just put in the Q&A box and we'll hopefully get through it before we run out of time. So first one for you, Roman, from Sylvia. I've met some difficult stakeholders that are somehow difficult because they're protecting their ego, or they don't even want anyone else to shine. Just wondering if you think these steps apply to those stakeholders that don't seem to have any other agenda except for ego.
Yeah, interesting question. Thank you for asking it. I think whenever you have the impression that somebody's behavior, somebody's speech and actions is really there to protect their ego or strengthen their ego, increase their ego, and it's about their reputation, it's about how they're being perceived, it's about their personal brand. I think for me, certainly it'd be then interesting to find out why is that. I found over the years that people who seem to have very big egos are often deep inside very insecure and very worried, and there's usually a reason why people act the way they're acting and say what they're saying, and so it can be helpful to learn a little bit more about what's going on here. So for instance, one of my friends, she's a lovely person, but she sometimes really dominates in meetings, and it can be difficult at times. And what I found out is that the behavior that she sometimes displays is really, again, based on her feeling insecure, and then being the one who kind of wants to make the decisions and want to drive things, gives her a sense of power and a sense of security and a sense of control, and it makes her feel good. And what's ultimately helpful, I think, is not feeling aversion then towards the individual and saying like what a bad person she or he is, but rather trying to empathize and rather try and try and understand what's going on and how can I help put the person a little bit more at ease. The more at ease the person is, the more relaxed the person can feel, the less it's about her or his ego, and the more open the person will be to collaboration. Having said that, if you are faced with somebody who is just behaving in a very uncollaborative way and is very pushy, very demanding, and very much caught up in unhealthy habits and not willing to open up and reflect in any way on her or his behavior, then sometimes the only choice you might have, certainly happened to me in the past, is just not to collaborate and just tell the individual in the best possible way and ultimately escalate it and say like, look, I'm really sorry, but the way she or he is acting, I really can't work with the individual. I've made an effort. I've tried everything I can, but it's not working out for me.
Great. And there's one after that that kind of ties in nicely to this from Carla. Is there anything you would do differently for dealing with a CEO or a founder where you don't have the option, I guess, to not collaborate?
Yeah, another really interesting and good question. The tricky thing with founders or CEOs is that obviously they're so powerful people, and then if we kind of show opposition, then there may be some dire consequences for us personally in terms of our career progression or even employment situation. At the same time, I think it's always worthwhile to reflect what are the options and what are we happy to, what environment are we happy to work in, and what are the choices, and yeah, as I said, what are the options that we have. Maybe it's the right thing to, in a way, accept behavior that we feel is not necessarily constructive and always helpful, hoping that things will improve, or maybe there are signs that things might change. Or maybe, it is, if you have a CEO or founder who is very, I know everything and I make all the key decisions, then maybe the individual really has to learn that in order to grow a business, you have to be willing to trust other people and support other people, and ultimately build a product management function and empower product people to take on products and services. And then, focus as the founder or CEO more on the business strategy and running the business rather than making product decisions. And so I think it's very much, for me, it'd be very much down to trying to understand the person's outlook and willingness and ability to kind of embrace change.
Excellent. There's another question from Rowan. How do you go about repairing a relationship that has been damaged by one of the 4 common and unhelpful ways of dealing with conflict?
Yeah, good question. So the model that I shared with you really was conceived as a model for negotiation. And when we negotiate, then we're typically in a situation of conflict, and we're trying to resolve the conflict, find common ground and a sustainable solution. The specific approach framework that I discuss in my new book is, in order to address conflict, is a nonviolent communication. And I feel nonviolent communication as a framework offers some helpful elements, aspects to help us repair relationships. And what the framework suggests is, so it was created many years ago by a gentleman called Marshall Rosenberg. And he wrote an excellent book about it. So in case you want to read up more about nonviolent communication. And so what it suggests is that we enter a dialogue and we try and establish a dialogue and share observations. So, you've had an argument with someone, and then share what you heard the person say, and what you think you said, and then attentively listen to how the other person saw the situation. And it might be similar, it might be rather different. And then talk about your emotions, how that made you feel. Maybe, what's some difficult emotions that might still be present, that you may still feel hurt, you may still feel a little bit angry or resentful. and then talk about why is that, you know, what's really going on for you. It's like with the feature example in the, the feature in the Sophie example. Yeah, there's a feature that we need to address, and there are all sorts of clever things we can do. And we can look at, you know, cost benefit, cost of delay, you know, all sorts of things that we can do in order to rationally assess if the feature is valuable or not. But, you know, what's going on really here? What are the underlying needs? And, you know, for me, be then being treated in a respectful way as the person in charge of the product, and, you know, the product management processes being followed, and not every stakeholder kind of doing whatever she or he fancies to do. So what are the underlying needs, and then what could be a helpful request to repair the connection, the relationship, but also move on, have a sustainable solution in place, an agreeable solution that we can both that helps us both. So, you know, trying to enter a dialogue and really trying to share observations, and also talking about your underlying feelings, emotions, I feel is a really helpful first steps to repair a relationship. But that's not always easy in a work environment. I appreciate that, and it's not always possible, because it really assumes that the other person is willing to enter a conversation. If the person does not want to do it, then, you know, it's very difficult to repair the relationship. And ultimately, you know, if you've attempted it once or twice, maybe even 3 times, and still, you know, even though you've tried your best, and the person's not willing to engage with you, then maybe you have to sort of say, well, you know, I can't work with the person anymore. A little bit similar to what I said earlier, you know.
Excellent. Good tips there. Changing track a little bit. This is from Vijaya. Apologies if I've said your name poorly. This is around when stakeholders come up with new requirements in the middle of a sprint unexpectedly, and then become business critical. How do you deal with those kind of unexpected pieces of information or requirements coming at you?
Yeah, nice question. So I'm just thinking how I should best answer the question. So I feel often when you have all of a sudden important requirements, important requests popping up, there can be a number of things at play. So one element is really around having an empowered and respected product person. I mean, when we, you know, in a Scrum context, it'd be the Scrum product owner, but I'm not sure that the role name matters that much. The concept is the same in Scrum as it is in other frameworks, that, you know, ultimately there is an empowered product person who can decide, and particularly if no consensus or agreement can be achieved. So if you have an empowered product person, then, you know, it's kind of strange that stakeholders just say like, but this is a must-have feature and it's super urgent and you've got to do it, which is like, well, really? I mean, you know, the person in charge of the product should be in charge of the product, right? The product owner should own the product, and she or he really should make those decisions, right? And the stakeholders should offer some feedback, right? And observations and ideas and concerns. So maybe there's something not quite right in terms of establishing the role of the person in charge of the product. And maybe there's something not quite right in terms of empowerment. It might be that the person is not being trusted. It might be that the person is lacking some skills. It might be that the person is lacking management support, or that product management as a function hasn't been effectively established in the organization, in a number of possible causes. And then the second common cause that I find is that there's a lack of longer term strategic thinking. So, you know, if you only focus kind of on what is happening in a sprint, or from sprint to sprint, or maybe in the next 2 or 3 months, and you don't have maybe something like a longer term product plan, like a high level product roadmap or an overarching strategy, then it's very difficult to, and in addition to that, I should say, you don't have like something like, you know, what some people refer to as continuous discovery, that you regularly review those plans and you regularly look at trends, be it consumer trends, technology trends, regulatory trends. You look at the product performance, maybe using KPIs. You look at what the competition is doing. So you're kind of proactive, and you kind of see threats and opportunities. So when that's not happening, then sometimes you're surprised, and, you know, quite rightly, stakeholders then come to you and say like, oh my God, you know, we missed this feature. It's super important. You've got to implement it now. But, you know, for me, that's sort of then again being very reactive, and it's a sign that something's not quite right. You know, so either it's about the continuous discovery and the strategic work and the strategic planning, that we're doing that's not quite right, or it's the empowerment, or possibly both, but it really shouldn't happen. And so, you know, from a Scrum perspective, without wanting to talk too much about a specific development framework, but sprints are protected. And so there should be no change should occur in a sprint. If you have to change a sprint, then you'd have to cancel the sprint, terminate it abnormally, and then essentially start a new sprint. But that would be a really drastic decision, and it's like pulling the emergency handle on a train. I mean, it doesn't happen too often, really. So yeah, think about your strategic work. Think about if you have a product strategy and product roadmap in place, and if you regularly review those artifacts, and if you have some form of continuous discovery process established, and think about the connection you have to the stakeholders and the amount of mutual trust and respect there is, and see if there's something that you can maybe improve to avoid stakeholders requesting features halfway through the sprint, you know, more frequently.
Excellent.
Sorry, that was a long answer,
no,
right?
it was, but I think that's also something that people can find themselves in. And it's quite disruptive to the team and to what you're doing. We have another question from Dialek. How do you address colliding requirements from different stakeholders? This is especially if you're in the early stages of product development. But I guess that could apply whether you're an early or a more mature product.
Yeah, another great question. So I think it's really good to engage with stakeholders and involve stakeholders in the development process and leverage their perspectives and experience and ideas and listen to their concerns. At the same time, I think as product people, we have to be clear who the beneficiaries of our products are. And these are the users and customers. And so ultimately what you want is that's at least what I would suggest, you want to clearly understand who are my users and customers, what's important to them, what problem should the product address for them, or benefit should it generate, or what are their main goals, what job or jobs do they want the product to do for them, and really focus on doing providing the desired value for those individuals and doing a great job for them, and not to, in a way, make the mistake of possibly pleasing stakeholders. Again, it's perfectly okay for stakeholders to have requirements. And I remember I was working on a telco product a while back, and the service department had some specific serviceability requirements, and that was great. But still, you know, the user then behind that would be service people, admin people who service. In that case, it was an enterprise telco product that would service that product, you know, in its production environment in a larger enterprise. And so I think it's always important to go back then and say, like, okay, you know, that's a requirement from a stakeholder. Where's it coming from? You know, how does it benefit my product, and how is it related to the end user needs? And, you know, and make sure that you, as I said, that you build your products for the end users and not for the stakeholders. And if you're in doubt, then experiment, try it out, and carry out a little bit of market and user research if you have to, and then get started and, you know, see if adding a feature would really make a difference and what the uptake would be. You know, one way to do this would be to use a feature fake, but, you know, the various ways how you can run that experiment, and that way you have some empirical data, and you get out of a, you know, possibly, you know, a situation where you argue, and, you know, you've got different arguments, and it's kind of hard to tell, you know, on paper which argument is better and more meaningful.
Opinions versus data. Yeah, experiment's kind of a great way to go if you're in that situation. Back onto the Sophie example, do you think it's worth letting her know, or that particular stakeholder know, that the way that they talk to you is unacceptable? And do you think that sets it up for future?
I think so. I think it's important for me. It'd be important to do it in the right way. Not saying that I've that I always do it and always have done it in the past. But I mean, if I was really blunt and I'd say to Sophie, if I didn't know her well, and if I didn't have a good connection with her, and I said to her, how the hell are you talking to me? Then I probably wouldn't be helpful, right? Because, she'd just then get defensive. She'd feel offended. So I feel offended because I think, she's talked to me inappropriately. And then I might sort of say something that isn't quite appropriate either, if I'm not careful. And then she feels offended. So we both are offended and kind of mad with each other. It's like, well, that wasn't helpful. So yeah, say it in the right way. So I think the point about empathy is not that empathy doesn't mean sugarcoating. Empathy doesn't mean we put up with inappropriate behavior and rubbish and will become like a punch bag. That's not the idea of empathy. Empathy simply means that we take a genuine, warm interest in the other person. But we can be very empathic and still very firm and clearly say, look, I understand, Sophie, that you are upset. I understand that this is really important to you. But quite frankly, the way you've just spoken to me, I don't think that's helpful. In fact, I've got a really strong emotional reaction to this now and feel, quite a lot of, I'm really quite angry right now. That wasn't helpful, but try and communicate it in such a way that she can accept it, because no point saying something that, people can't process, people can't take on board. And so that's then, what helps me is trying to bring awareness to how I speak, my speech,
Mm-hmm.
and try and speak in a way that is beneficial and kind, but at the same time honest, truthful. It's no point, kind of, as I said earlier, kind of sort of half lying. It's like, no, it's okay. If it's not okay, at the same time, there's no point being kind of aggressive or something, or accusing, because that's likely to make the situation only worse. Easier said than done, though.
Yes, very much so. We have a question from Chitesh, which is on a slightly different topic, but how do you embed into an agile focused team that's not very focused on user outcomes and they're more driven by business outcomes, and continuously challenge suggestions and proposals to look at user pain points?
So what helps me to create a user focus and maintain a user focus is to work with something that I'd refer to as a product strategy. And different people have different ideas what a product strategy is and what it should contain. But for me, clearly stating who the users and customers are, and clearly stating why they would want to use the product or pay for the product in one way or another are key elements. And when if you then try and create such a strategy together with the stakeholders and the development team, the key stakeholders and the development team, and maybe even start by asking people, well, who do you think the users and customers are, and why do you think people actually use our product or pay for our product? Then that brings out possibly different perspectives, and it creates clarity, transparency, and allows you then to enter in a conversation and try and reach common ground. And if you don't know, then reach out to the users and carry out some form of user research, like direct observation or user interviews. A great way to so that's one way, and related to kind of exposing or getting to know the users. I mean, that's really powerful for development team members, giving development team members the opportunity to meet real users and see how they use the product or competitor products, and what they might be struggling with, and what their experience is and what their perspectives are. That tends to be more powerful than you as the product owner or product manager or person in charge of the product saying, yeah, but the users, yeah, but the users, yeah, but the users. So take at least some of the development team members with you when you carry out some market and user research, or allow the development team members to listen to user feedback directly. Be it live, be it through a video recording or other means.
Right. We have a question from Magda, which is back on the founder as a stakeholder situation. She has a founder who is doing the product research and thinks that the research she has done is the way that the product should be moving towards. But what she's actually doing is creating the product roadmap and then giving it to Magda as the product owner to follow. How does Magda deal with that kind of situation?
So it seems to me what the founder of the company has done is retains strategic product ownership, or the individuals carrying out strategic product management work, and then asking the person in charge of the product, in this case Magda, to in a way execute the roadmap, which is a little bit more, to a certain extent, a little bit more similar. I don't know if you agree, but I'd say it's a little bit more like treating Magda as a project manager rather than an empowered product manager. I mean, I'd really expect that a product manager, product owner, an empowered product person owns the product roadmap and owns the strategy, and ultimately is responsible for ensuring that the product becomes successful or stays successful. So that would require the founder, the CEO, to let go and empower the individual, empower Magda. Now, what's the best way to do this? I don't know. I think it'll depend on the context and the individual. But one way to go about it is to engage with the founder and find out why the person wants to retain control over the strategic aspects of the product. I mean, having founded a company myself, admittedly a few years ago, it can be hard to learn to trust other people and to delegate and to empower people and to let go, particularly if you have one product and that product is really, the revenue source and allowing you to grow the business, and then kind of handing that product over to another person requires trust and it requires courage. So anything you can do as Magda in order to build trust and show the founder that you're capable of running the product and capable of building the roadmap and taking ownership of the strategic aspects will help the individual. But again, engaging maybe in a conversation and trying to understand what's going on, how can I bring about a positive change? How can I influence the individual? Might be helpful. But it might take time.
It's often how things happen in time. We've got a question. We are reaching 7 o'clock, so we've probably got time for another couple questions, Roman, if you're happy to stay around for a little bit longer. We've got a question from Hussein. How would you manage an external entity, as an example, a parent company who's given you the requirements via top-down management directives?
Yeah, another interesting question. And if people come to you and say, here are my requirements, can you please implement them? Then I feel they're putting you in a situation where they're not really looking at you as, and it may sound harsh, but they're not really looking at you as a product person. They're looking at you as a project manager. I mean, project managers are being, and this is not being disrespectful to project managers, but as a project manager, I would expect to be given a requirement specification or a list of requirements. And then my job would be to turn those requirements into working software with one or more development teams. That'd be my job. And if I've done this, I was successful. But as a product manager, as a product owner, as a product person, my job is to figure out how my product should create value, to figure out who are the users and why would they want to use the product, and how can my product create value for those individuals, and therefore what are the features and what are the requirements that we'll have to implement. So I'm meant to figure this out. So if the stakeholders have some suggestions, personally I think it's great. It's nice that people have suggestions, nice that they're engaged, nice that they're interested. So let's be grateful. But at the same time, let's make sure that we do focus on the users, and that we tell the stakeholders in the right way, look, if you want me to own the product, if you want me to manage the product and take responsibility for the product success, then that's not really the right approach. That's not helpful. You got to trust me, and you got to give me more authority ultimately, or respect my authority. And how you best do it, and if that's possible in the situation described, hard for me to say. Again, trying to engage with the individuals, trying to be understanding and listen to their perspectives and needs might be a good way. But possibly if it's a contractual setup, there's de facto not much you can do, apart from just kind of, grinning and bearing it for now. And then, thinking about, okay, what about, the next project or the next release or, the next development effort.
Excellent. Question from Amandeep. It's around showcasing essentially boring features. such as security and performance, so things that aren't really front end. How do you encourage the importance of these to your stakeholders over something that's a front end feature?
Yeah, interesting one. So non-functional requirements, operational requirements can be crucial for products. Sort of a well-known example that comes to mind is the Google Chrome browser. When the browser was first developed way over 10 years ago, I think it was launched towards the end of 2008, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe that at that time, Google said that our browser is different because it's simple to use, it's fast, and it's safe. And you look at, well, simplicity, safety, and speed, and they're all non-functional requirements. So, they can be standout features, they can be differentiators. Now, in order to help your stakeholders understand why do they matter, I'd again be tempted to ask, why do you have to tell your stakeholders that they matter? You're the person in charge of the product. You say they do matter. So there could be an issue around empowerment again. And otherwise, I think really just explaining to the stakeholders that operational, non-functional qualities can influence not only technology and architecture selection, they can influence the life expectancy of your product. If you get them right, you may have to rewrite parts of your product or possibly the entire product much sooner than anticipated than you'd like to, for instance. They can even, as I said, explained with the Google example or showed with the Google example, they can even make standout features. But again, it's up to you as the person in charge of the product to decide what are the key features of my product. It shouldn't be up to the stakeholders to tell you. So, stakeholder collaboration engagement does not mean that stakeholders tell you what to do. It means that you involve stakeholders in important product decisions so that you leverage their perspective, you leverage their expertise and creativity. You hopefully build shared understanding, and you hopefully make it, you show that you value them and build trust, and you hopefully make it more likely, maximize the chances that they support the decisions. But it doesn't mean that you do what people necessarily tell you. And I'm not saying you shouldn't ignore, you shouldn't listen, but you don't want to end up with a feature soup, a loose collection of hardly related features that doesn't really then create much value for the users and gives rise to a horrible user experience. You really want to focus on what's best for the users, believing that if you create enough value for the users, then that'll create value for your business. So, creating value for the users and creating value for the business, that should be our two main objectives as product people, not doing what the stakeholders tell us or not pleasing the stakeholders, right? So.
Excellent. All right, we have time for one more question from Radislava. Any tips for working on an early stage SaaS product that will be sold via a global network of partners and direct, where you have to balance both the users and your channel partners?
No, I'm not a SaaS product expert, but it's like ultimately like any product development, and I don't think it matters if it's SaaS or not SaaS, and if it's B2C or B2B. Personally, I think what's always important is to really, again, as I've suggested a few times, understand what's the value proposition of our product, who are the beneficiaries, who are the users and customers, and then what are the business targets, the business goals that we have, and how we're going to achieve those business goals. And if you need partners in order to achieve those business goals, then hopefully that should be captured, or you might want to capture it in some form of business model. And you might want to use a tool like Alexander Osterwalder's business model canvas to capture key business model elements, for instance. But then balancing the different needs and choosing the right features and requirements for your product, I think that's really something that you as the person in charge of the product will have to do, and do it through ultimately a form of experimentation by initially engaging with the users and customers, but also then in the partners, and trying to understand their needs. And I like to refer to those kind of activities. I'd like to time box them, and I like to refer to them as time box discovery or time box strategizing work. Strategizing work. Talking too much.
And then
And then as you start building the product, use an iterative incremental process like Scrum, where you do more experimentation, more validation, but not so much around the problem realm, but more about the solution, the technologies, the architectures, the functionality that your product is providing. But yeah, I think it's just part and parcel of ultimately our job as the person in charge of the product, even though that may not sound terribly helpful.
That's a tough one when you're balancing those different segments and users. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Roman, so much for joining us from the other side of the world. I'm sure it's been an early morning for you. So right. We'll let you get on with the day. But we appreciate you taking the time to speak to not only Melbourne people, we've had people from all over the world. So that was a wonderful session and meetup, and lots of great tips for everyone to use as well. For everyone that's still on the line, thank you for attending. Keep an eye on the ProductTank meetup for future sessions that we'll be running. But in the meantime, we hope you all stay safe and well, and we'll see you again, probably online. It's kind of 2020, everything's online. All right.
Thank you very much, Roman. We've loved having you.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely to be with you.
That was great.
And we'll be sharing the recording in a few days with everyone, including yourself, Roman. So if you do want to share Roman's insights with friends or colleagues, you'll be able to do that in a couple of days.
Yes, excellent. Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, Roman.
See you, Roman. Bye-bye.